All right, so welcome back to part 2 of strings. We'll finish this up here. So strings, let's say we come up with a string called, really long, the Itsy Bitsy Spider, a nursery rhyme. We can do in. We can test and see if something is in or not in a string. So we can say if spider in rhyme, then we want to say, hey, we found it. Otherwise, we'll say didn't find it. And this works exactly like what you think. If we run this, and it says found it, what if we add an S on the end? Do you still think it'll find it? It does, because it's finding just this part right here. Not looking necessarily for a whole word. What about this? It doesn't, because it's not in it. I think that's pretty useful. Equally useful is to say not in, right? Not in. So to make this make sense, we need to flip-flop these around. If spider is not in, then we're going to say didn't find it. Otherwise, we will say found it. And if we run this, it'll say the right thing, didn't find it. So in, not in, remember not is the negation operator. So let's keep moving here. There are many other string methods. In fact, the book doesn't even cover all of what Python will do with strings, and I'm not going to cover it either. In fact, I won't even cover as much as the book does, because then the video would be pretty long. You can Google Python and strings and find all sorts of other information. This is what Python is really well known for, is string manipulation. If you come up with any wild idea of what you want to do with a string, chances are there's a library out there. Maybe chances are it's built in. If not, it's an add-on that will do anything you want to do with a string. Python is really, really well known for text manipulation of any kind, whether it's HTML, right? HTML is a form of text. All sorts of stuff out there. I'm just going to try to hit the highlights of some of the more useful things, maybe that you'll find useful for the assignments in this class and just for your general basic knowledge of Python. But let's create a string just to experiment with here. Doesn't really mean anything. And we can say if test is a digit, we can test quickly and easily without having to write our own code. We can call isDigit, this built-in function, to see if it's a digit or not. And there's plenty of instances where you might want to know, is what I've received back from a function or whatever I have as a string, is this a digit or not? That's very, very helpful. And it says false because it's looking exclusively for digits. It has to be all digits. So if we do this, then it should say true. And then now it should say false, because is space a digit? No. The white space right here, is that that's a space. So putting this back the way it was, other things as well we can do with strings. We can say, again, let's create maybe something like this. We can say let's see, if test is alphanumeric, then we'll just copy this down here again. In fact, I should just use that up there instead of retyping it. So alphanumeric it returns true if the string contains only alphabetic letters, and it has to be at least one character in length. And that's true of a lot of these built-in testing functions. So it has to be an alphabetic character. And so it would return, I believe it's going to return false right now because of the space, and I'm right. If we get rid of this space, then it will return true. If I throw a 9 in here, it's gonna, or 911, whatever, just put 9. then it's going to return false again because it's not an alphabetic character. Now, I can't remember about a dash, a short dash like that, or the minus sign. Yeah, okay, interesting. What about the plus sign? I don't think that's considered alphabetic either because it's not in the alphabet, right? Okay, interesting stuff. So that's another tool in your tool belt that you can pull out. And here's another interesting one. Let's see. We can say Python allows us to, let's steal this again. Really, let me just, perhaps I should just overwrite this. Test ends with, so we can say, does my string end with something? Yes or no? So if we run this, it's true because clearly TION, it ends with that. What if we put that? Would that be true or false? It's going to be false because it doesn't end that way. What about starts with? Does it start with this? No. And so the string ends here, it starts here, but it does start with basic, right? Right. So two more tools that you can use, starts with and ends with. And I think, let me check here. I think it's program 8-5 in section 8.3. So that's section 8.3 and a sample program called 8-5. It runs through a lot of these built-in functions. It has one test string and it tests that string for everything and prints true or false, I believe. And that's pretty interesting. You might look at that. I think it's pretty interesting. Another idea here. Let's see. We can say test equals, and let's put some odd capitalization going on here just for the sake of showing you this. We can say print test, and we're asking it to print all lowercase version of our string, and it does. See how it made it all lowercase? Well, you can guess what upper does, right? It's going to make it all uppercase. That's pretty handy. We can, if you remember, we used write strip before in file operations to strip white space from the right side of a string. Well, you can do the left side here as well. You can strip the left side of a string if you have white space. Let me go ahead and just print it like this to show you what I'm talking about, to make sure we're all on the same page here. You see that? See how it's indented off the left-hand side down here because of the space I put in, right? So let's put back in this, and now watch what happens. It takes it all away. It gets rid of all the spaces on the left-hand side. It's not as easy to show you, but the same thing is true on the right-hand side, but it's not as easy to see because everything is left aligned. We can also do this right here. We can just use strip. That's interesting. So what do you think strip does? We can take off a, like the word A. We run this, then see A has disappeared. If we put another A there, it only hits on the first one. So that's interesting. It's a nice tool to use. Now, what strip normally does is it strips the space off of either end. Remember, L strip strips the space off the left side. Right strip or R strip strips the space off the right-hand side. Strip will strip the spaces off either end. But interestingly, L strip, whoa, did not mean to do that. L strip, R strip, and strip, you can override these. If you do nothing, it assumes you're talking about spaces. But you could put in A, B, well, you can put in any character and it will pull just that off. The left side, the right side, or the first place it finds it, as is the case with strip. So you can research those more on your own if you want to know more about those. but extremely powerful tools. That's the common denominator with Python. You get very powerful tools that you can use with very little code. In other languages, this would take sometimes quite a bit more code, depending on the actual language. Another interesting thing here is we can, let me go back up here real quick and find this right here. Let's pull this back out. Let's comment all this out so it doesn't interrupt us. We can take our rhyme again, and let's say we want to, just giving you another idea of what Python can do quickly, easily, with very little code, is we can say rhyme and find. I want to find a character, or more than one character, doesn't matter. And I need to put the right syntax here. So what do you think it's going to print? I'm telling it to find H. So do you think it's going to print H? Well, no, because why? What value would that give me? How would that help me? I already know what I want to find. It's going to print the index position of where it finds the first H. And there could be more than one H. But in this case, remember 0 and 1, right? Whoops, I just reversed them. But you remember about the positions of strings, right? Everything has a string position. So on ITSE, the I is string position 4. So it returns to me here position 1. And that's very handy to know, because maybe we can start combining this. You remember how in the previous video we were slicing a string? We were getting the first word, I think it was Back to the Future up here. We were slicing the first word of Back to the Future, and let's see, where did that go? Yeah, we were slicing this all up. Well, you can combine these together and say, well, I want to start slicing the first time I find an H or an A or whatever it is you're trying to do. And then you can, when you get that position back, plug that position into the slicing that we did up here with the Back to the Future, and plug it directly in to what you are slicing. Rather than hard coding a 0, hard code a variable that has 1 in it, or whatever the slice is. So these, when you start combining these, you get exceptionally powerful tools for text manipulation. Another idea is to replace something. We can say, replace every instance of S with Z. And if we do this, every instance of S becomes a Z. Interesting. And very, very powerful. When you start combining, you should read the strings chapter with an eye toward combining this with what you already know, and combining some of this together, and you can do some very, very powerful things with strings. Now we're almost done here, but I do want to show you one other thing that is very, very powerful. I've used this many times in my career with Python, working in industry. I have used something called string split. And every language has something like this, but it's very useful when used in conjunction with files. When you're reading data from a file, it lets us have a lot more power and control. So let's pretend that we have read from a file, a line from a file called, I don't know, Mary had a little lamb. Okay, this is what we read from a file. And I think we've already learned how to do that. So you know how to read from a file, but let's just to skip all that. Let's just say we have this in memory. And what we can do is we can split. When we say split, right? And notice how when I do this, press dot. Remember, we talked about rstrip and all this other stuff earlier. Some of these we didn't even talk about, like is decimal, capitalize. I mean, there's so many of these. So many. Is ASCII. But in this case, we're using split. So you can press dot, and you can experiment with all of these. even the ones we didn't go over, but we split along what? Well, the default is a space, and you can put a space in here, but you don't have to. The default is if you don't specify anything, it assumes you're splitting along a space. So it's going to return a list. That's what's happening here. This built-in function called split returns a list, and it split this along spaces. So it now gives us a list of words from our string. Now, as interesting as that is, we can go a step further. We can say, again, line from file. And you remember back when we had the module that dealt with inputting and outputting information to a file, reading information to a file, writing information to a file. Suppose, and I don't know if you recall, but I did the movie theme where I talked about the name of the movie, the year it was made, the revenue it made in millions, and the rating that it received. And there we had this a little bit of an awkward way the book presented that, with each line was a record, so to speak. So The Matrix was on one line, 1999 was on another line. I believe, let's see, yeah. Pull that back out just for reference. Movies, yeah. See, do you remember all this that we did in that module? A better way of doing that is to put it all on one line. So this is the line that I got from the file. So in other words, the file would look like this. Rather than having everything like that, it would pretend this is a new file here. It would have that, right? You would have this all on one line. That's probably a more realistic, what you might see in the real world a little more, rather than everything split apart on different lines. So you can already see where we're going with this, right? You can take line from file. Actually, let's do this. Let's take result equals line from file, because line from file dot split is going to return us a list that we're going to store in result, and we're going to split along the comma. And now we can print the result of this, which is a list, and you can see how now we have a list of our fields. So if we were reading this from a file, then we would have access to the name, the year, the amount it made, and we wouldn't have to have it on separate lines, because we can have it all on one line. It could be separated by commas. It could be separated by semicolons. It wouldn't make sense to separate them by spaces, because there is natural spacing in, various names. It could be separated by, anything. It could be delimited with literally anything. And we could break it back apart and then access each one individually, each field individually. So if we run this, I think that's pretty cool. We do have this space, I noticed. Can you remember what we should do here to get rid of that space? Actually, we may have to, it may not let me do that here. Yeah, I may have to do something like this. I may have to say, and then say, which we know that is a string, and just put strip. And now if we print that, that should get rid of those spaces. Yeah. There, we had left space on the left-hand side, and it got rid of them. So interesting stuff. I hope this sheds some light on your understanding of Python strings, and shows you hopefully a glimpse. This is just a glimpse of what Python can do with strings. If this interests you, or you're interested in becoming a professional Python programmer, then we do have a sequel to this course, and I recommend that you look in Google and find more about strings. It's so many things out there dealing with HTML. There's something called Beautiful Soup. which allows you to do all sorts of HTML manipulation, pulling web pages from the internet, which a web page is a text file. I'm not talking about the images or anything like that with it, although you can pull those as well, but just the raw text and then manipulating certain HTML elements. It's stunningly powerful what Python can do with strings.